was carrying civilian traffic. And while the refugees fight for food, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia says it won't admit any more. Hello and welcome. I'm Anita McNaught. Airstrikes are continuing against Serbia, with non-military targets again being hit. Serbian television has reported that NATO jets have destroyed a second major bridge over the Danube. Meanwhile, the first documentary evidence of what Serb forces are believed to be doing inside Kosovo has been obtained by the BBC. It is a video which appears to show the aftermath of a Serb operation against one village. The man who gave the tape to us said he was in the village of Krušemadi when it was attacked by Serb militia. He escaped and spent 5 days in hiding before returning to the village with a video camera. The horrific footage showing the bodies of villagers, many shot in the head, appears to confirm the testimony of thousands of refugees who are still pouring out of Kosovo. Our report contains graphic pictures.
In the last few days, 1,000 words have been used to describe what's happening inside Kosovo. Refugees have been asked to separate fact from hearsay, rumour from detail. They've had to recall scenes they'd sooner forget. In an act of extraordinary courage, this man, Melaim Belamika, has smuggled out pictures of the terror across the border. To have been caught with the videotape you're about to see would have meant certain death. Melaim lived in the village of Krušemadi, his birthplace. On the night of the 25th of March, the village was surrounded by Serb forces. Women, children and the aged were taken away. A group of men tried to escape. They didn't get very far. Most of the pictures are even more gruesome than these. Many were obviously killed with a single bullet to the head. Melaim says over 100 died when the Serb forces shelled the area. He couldn't count them all. Melaim hid for 7 days before he took these pictures.
They were killed one by one. A group of Serbs were on the top of the hill. Others came from behind. Our men were captured and the Serbs killed them one after the other.
All these victims look like young men. Were they members of the Kosovo Liberation Army?
They were all my age. No one was in the KLA. We were all farmers.
This was murder most intimate. The killers knew some of the villagers, calling them out by name.
There were more than 100 soldiers. Some of the Serbs had masks. Others were in uniform. Some were from the area, even known to the community.
Melaim has given me a list of 26 victims, people he knew well, many from their days as classmates.
I've done this so that my son, my grandson, the next generation will never forget what the Serbs have done to the Albanian people.
As the evidence of calculated terror mounts up, the diplomats must surely adjust their notion of Kosovo's future status. It's inconceivable that these people will ever go back to a Kosovo that has any formal relationship with Serbia. An international protectorate is more likely. George Alagaya, BBC News, Kukës in northern Albania.
The official Yugoslav news agency says 7 civilians were injured in one of the attacks on the Fridon bridge in the city of Novi Sad. NATO's leaders have once again reiterated their determination to continue the air campaign against Serbia.
Serb television shows pictures of what it says is NATO's latest bombing raid. The Freedom Bridge in the northern Serbian city of Novi Sad appears destroyed. The Serbs say civilian traffic was crossing when the bomb fell and that 7 were injured. 2 out of 3 bridges in Novi Sad have now been bombed. This seems to be evidence of a concerted attack by the alliance on the Yugoslav infrastructure. In the so-called Phase 3 of its operation, NATO wants to limit President Milosevic's ability to move men and machinery around the country. As part of that mission, NATO troops in Bosnia have again joined the conflict, destroying a key rail link that runs through Bosnia on its way from Belgrade to Montenegro. And another front appears to be opening up for the alliance as it takes an increasingly active role, getting aid to thousands of Kosovan refugees. The persistent question many are asking is how far the alliance will take this. Will it send ground troops into Kosovo?
The basic thought about use of ground force has not changed, and that is that there is not an intention or plan to put a ground force into a combat environment to invade Kosovo. We have said all along that the ground force would go into a permissive environment.
Ground troops aside, the alliance has no qualms about increasing its firepower. The USS Theodore Roosevelt is on its way to the Adriatic, and a further 12 stealth bombers are also being dispatched. NATO is doing all it can to win this war without getting too close. Stephen Gibbs, BBC News.
Britain's urging
illustrates a lot of the stuff that's actually happening over there.
Fly over real mountains, pass through real valleys. At the Jane's Combat Simulations Division of Electronic Arts, programmers use actual digital maps and satellite photos to help replicate the Balkan terrain.
True color and elevation is what they call it, so it's the right brown or orange or green, and the right mountains are in the right places.
Okay, there's the missile being fired.
Some news agencies and military writers use the images to illustrate the war in progress.
There's our target, and target is destroyed.
Former Navy aviator David Bonacci says that all good programmers try for realism in the cockpit.
Okay. It's basically a game being used to illustrate what's happening in real life.
Game designers force players to think like a pilot under fire.
A lot of times you see the war, you know, it's big and it's grand, but really it boils down to people doing their tasks that are laid out for them.
On a stealth bombing run, Bonacci is hit.
Incoming missile, 6 o'clock.
Oops.
We're going in.
Warning,
Eject.
engine, fire, left. Warning,
I'm going to go ahead and eject out of here. Bad news.
Game fans contrive their own missions and play against each other on the internet. A new one follows the real-life rescue of the American pilot last Saturday with a mission to destroy the remnants of his crashed plane. War games are among the most popular computer games. They offer adventure with safety. The worst threat posed in these simulated skies is to the pilot's self-esteem. Greg Lefebvre, CNN, San Francisco.
News that enough food has been stored to feed 400,000 people for 6 months. The Russians are now moving 7 ships to the Mediterranean, they say, to observe the situation.
Under fire once again, and the misery growing for a mass of refugees running out of places to go. Just minutes ago, a CNN correspondent reported seeing several explosions in Belgrade. We are told that fires are lighting up the city skies. The latest assault follows others on Saturday. NATO taking out a second bridge in Novi Sad, which is Yugoslavia's second largest city. A cruise missile exploded around 8 in the evening local time, destroying a bridge near a Serb television station. That bridge is considered an important link over the Danube River. Serb TV reports civilian injuries in that bombing, showing images of people reportedly injured as they were crossing the bridge. There are also unconfirmed reports that another bridge west of Novi Sad was hit. Meanwhile, the refugee crisis grows. NATO reports 765,000 Kosovars are displaced from their homes, and it is warning that if the current pace of the exodus continues, all ethnic Albanians could be forced from Kosovo in 10 to 20 days. While hoping to help NATO bring an end to the crisis, the United States is sending more stealth fighters to Europe. The first 4 of 13 stealth F-117A fighters took off from Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico Saturday. One fighter will go to Aviano Air Base in Italy. It will replace the U.S. plane that went down over Yugoslavia last weekend. And the others are head to Spangdahlem in Germany. And the U.S. Air Force says 250 support personnel will be going to Germany by transport plane in the Yugoslavia. And we're going now to the Pentagon for an update in CNN's David Ensor. David?
The announcement the USS Teddy Roosevelt and its carrier battle group will join NATO forces in operations against Yugoslavia means about another 50 combat planes for the alliance arsenal. It also adds several more ships capable of firing cruise missiles. The Pentagon is also sending 13 F-117 stealth fighter bombers. NATO officials say they will use the increased firepower until Belgrade backs down.
We are determined to keep this going until we stop the Serb armed forces, and we're hoping to do that very soon in the next few days. Our pressure is intensifying all the time.
But NATO and Pentagon officials remain frustrated they have been able to do so little to stop alleged Serb atrocities in Kosovo.
We continue to attack those things that sustain their forces. As we've said from the beginning, you cannot stop this level of violence in Kosovo from air power instantly.
Pentagon officials admit the A-10 planes designed to target tanks and troops on the ground have yet to fire in anger. A spokesman says, however, that Apache ground attack helicopters may soon be deployed.
I would expect action to be forthcoming on that, and that's all I can say at this stage.
Days, a week?
I would expect relatively soon.
The Apache helicopters could be very effective against Serb tanks and artillery. They move fast and low with considerable night capability. But they would require several hundred Army support personnel, and their deployment would raise the risk of American casualties. The humanitarian tragedy is also getting Pentagon attention. A giant C-17 cargo plane left the U.S. carrying food for refugees in Albania.
You saw these yesterday, but this is a packet that holds enough food to feed one refugee for a day. It's about
an hour ago or so that we heard those two large explosions in the distance. Serbian television is reporting that a plant which makes heating units was hit. According to the television station, 5 workers were inside the plant at the time of the impact, and those 5 workers have now reported to be hospitalized and in okay conditions, although we don't have any latest information about how well they're doing or not. Certainly, judging from what I can see now outside my window, there is a huge black cloud of smoke rising into the sky against what appears to be against a full moon and an orange glow. So it appears that from what I can tell from my window, there was a direct hit against this plant. Shortly after the explosion.
But Serb television claims one of the targets was a central heating factory in the southwest suburbs. It's the second time NATO has attacked the center of the Yugoslavian capital. We're now bringing you a package from Alison Jack.
For the second night, Belgrade burns. At least 7 explosions have shaken the capital in the early hours of this morning. The cruise missile attack is believed to have been launched from NATO warships in the Adriatic. There is devastation in New Belgrade. What appears to be an industrial plant is in flames.
I'm outside now looking across an apartment block, and then just behind that there's a massive orange glow in the sky. There's clearly a huge, huge fire burning there, and we think it's some sort of public utility, possibly some sort of hot water pumping station for the apartment blocks all around us. It really is huge. It's a beautiful, clear night. There's a full moon there lighting up the city, as well as the orange glow, and a massive ball of smoke is now rising above the apartment blocks, which will soon obscure that moon.
The media in Belgrade are reporting that at least 3 people, possibly night shift workers, were injured in the attack. This appears to be the most aggressive strike so far. As well as the bombing of the heating station, there are reports of further hits in the southwest suburbs, in Novi Sad in the north, and in southern Serbia too.
The operation is ongoing, and we had manned and unmanned assets out, and at the moment everybody who should have been returned with this aircraft has returned.
NATO had warned repeatedly that it would be stepping up its air campaign. Earlier in the evening, 2 bridges were hit. This one in Novi Sad resulted in 7 casualties, according to Serbian TV. Alison Jack, Sky News.
They never thought they'd be tackling a refugee crisis on this scale in Europe. There's 12 tons of supplies on board this plane. Most of it is medical aid, rehydration salts and penicillin. One RAF Hercules has already flown out to the area, carrying 20 tons of tents and blankets.
Well, it's a very busy time, obviously, but it's nice to be able to do something to help out when there is effectively a war going on. People are obviously in very dire straits out there, so anything we can do is all to the good.
Also on board, a British government aid official.
This is obviously a very serious problem.
There are many, many people out there that are in need of urgent help. These things have happened all over the world, but of course this is the first time that it has happened in this sort of scale in Europe.
This plane was destined for Skopje in Macedonia, a flight of about 4 hours, and then on to Tirana in Albania. It will be followed by another on Tuesday, and many more after that. Andrew Moore, Sky News at RAF Lynham in Wiltshire.
From the cockpit of a US Navy P-3 Orion, the Adriatic looks like a crowded place. At the moment, an entire NATO fleet patrols these waters. But within days, this area may get even more crowded. A Russian reconnaissance ship is already on its way here. Part of its mission is to monitor the activities of NATO. But the Russians could be watched too by planes like this P-3.
Anytime you bring a ship out here that's not one of ours, it raises the stakes. It makes the threat just a little bit greater until, you know, you realize what aspect they're out here in.
The P-3 is an aging Navy warhorse, but recently it's been outfitted with new technology that gives it much greater versatility.
It's a multi-mission, all-weather, multi-mission capable aircraft. It does quite a few different things. Anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare. We do reconnaissance.
Helping the P-3 in its reconnaissance role is a new upgraded radar. It works both day and night in all weather conditions. Once the P-3's radar picks up traffic, anything from a battleship to an ocean liner, its cameras zoom in for a closer look. These pictures can then be transmitted immediately to the ground. For the past few days, P-3s have been on full battle alert. To ward off possible attacks from submarines and surface ships, they're fully armed with torpedoes and cluster bombs. So far, P-3s haven't fired any of their weapons. As for the future, crews say they're prepared for any eventuality.
We practice, we train for that threat, and we have the assets that we work with in conjunction to keep everybody safe.
How safe the Adriatic will be is hard to predict, but if the Russians do come, the missions of the P-3s will become even more sensitive. Satinder Bindra, CNN, aboard a US Navy P-3 above the Adriatic.
Whilst I have no imagery to show you, I can assure you that the very hot spots that we have imaged and coverage from Serbian television give us a very warm feeling as to the success of these attacks. Surface-to-air missile activity was again light, and happily, once again, we lost no aircraft. Although one F-16 diverted into another base with a mechanical problem, it landed safely. Equally, we did not claim any Serbian aircraft in the air. If you recall yesterday, I showed you Serbian TV pictures of the damaged MUP building in Belgrade. I can now show you some of our own imagery confirming the damage. This is the building before the attack, and you will note that I have highlighted with a green arrow the position of the hospital which has been mentioned in the media. And the second slide shows you it after the attack. You will notice the destruction on the front end of the building. Finally, I have one clip to show you today. It is a weapon video from one of our recent attacks against a radar site near Pristina. This site had been an important part of the FRI integrated air defense system within Kosovo. This element no longer poses a threat to our aircrews.
Damage.
It was another devastating hit against Yugoslavia's capital. The fuel tanks of Belgrade's largest heating plant up in flames. According to officials here, none of the containers remained intact. They say the plant is now completely out of commission, vital parts of its engines destroyed. One security guard, according to the plant manager, died, burned alive. 3 more are hospitalized.
Svi radnici Beogradske elektrana su zapanjeni u šoku.
All our workers are in deep shock.
Ne možemo da verujemo
We can't believe
da postoje ljudi
that there is a people
koji mogu da pucaju na ovakvo postrojenje.
who can target this type of facilities.
Whether this complex was used by the army or other military purposes, as NATO claims, is not clear. However, authorities here insist this complex was providing heat to more than 1 million people in Belgrade. Across town, the aftermath of another raging inferno. Serbian television says this police academy was hit in the middle of the night. No casualties were reported here, as most of NATO's likely targets, like police stations and some government buildings, sources say, have been cleared of all their personnel. But it took the firefighters several hours to control the blaze, and the nearby military hospital, according to television reports, was also damaged by the blast. Away from Belgrade, Serbian television showed the aftermath of another NATO attack. The Freedom Bridge in Novi Sad, Yugoslavia's second largest city, collapsed into the water. As a result of the strike, Serb officials say electricity has been cut off in the area. Now, 2 of the city's 3 bridges are downed, blocking one of Europe's most important waterways. A Serbian television report said that no air raid sirens were heard, and several people were using the bridge at the time of the explosion, causing injuries.
What Serbian television describes as a thermal electric plant, a police academy and an oil refinery. Yugoslav media say 3 people were killed and at least 8 injured in attacks across Serbia. In some other developments, NATO says Ibrahim Rugova, the moderate ethnic Albanian leader, is being held by Serb forces at his house. Reports from the U.S. Defense Department.
13 F-117 stealth fighter bombers taking off from the United States. 1 to replace the plane that was shot down, 12 more to augment NATO forces. The announcement that the USS Teddy Roosevelt and its carrier battle group will also join NATO forces in operations against Yugoslavia means about another 50 combat planes for the alliance arsenal. It also adds several more ships capable of firing cruise missiles.
We are determined to keep this going until we stop the Serb armed forces, and we're hoping to do that very soon in the next few days. Our pressure is intensifying all the time.
But NATO and Pentagon officials remain frustrated they have been able to do so little to stop alleged Serb atrocities in Kosovo.
We continue to attack those things that sustain their forces. As we've said from the beginning, you cannot stop this level of violence in Kosovo from air power instantly.
Pentagon officials admit the A-10 planes designed to target tanks and troops on the ground have yet to fire in anger. A spokesman says, however, that Apache ground attack helicopters may soon be deployed. The Apache helicopters could be very effective against Serb tanks and artillery. They move fast and low with considerable night capability. But they would require several hundred Army support personnel, and their deployment would raise the risk of American casualties. The humanitarian tragedy is also getting Pentagon attention. A giant C-17 cargo plane left the U.S. carrying food for refugees in Albania.
You saw these yesterday, but this is a packet that holds enough food to feed 1 refugee for a day. It's about 2,200 calories, and it is non-meat, so it can be eaten by people of all faiths.
What Pentagon officials are most counting on is a change in the weather. For pilots, officials say the last 48 hours have been the worst. They need a break in the clouds to be allowed to use laser-guided weapons against Serbian forces on the ground in Kosovo. David Ensor, CNN, the Pentagon.
Fired from a distance, the cruise missile has reduced the risk to U.S. pilots and become essential to U.S. military strategy. But so many air-launched cruise missiles have been fired in both Iraq and the Balkans, the U.S. is running low on these weapons. When the NATO action in Kosovo began, the U.S. Air Force had about 150 air-to-ground cruise missiles. Now, Pentagon sources tell CNN that number is less than 100. While there's no shortage of sea-launched cruise missiles, the dwindling number of the air-launched version could prompt a change of strategy by NATO commanders.
It does reduce the military's options, and particularly it forces them to rely more on manned aircraft, thus putting pilots in harm's way.
The air-to-ground cruise missile is a heavy weapon designed to be used in the early stages of an attack against fixed targets like command headquarters. The problem for the Pentagon is, because of a treaty with Russia, it can't build any more. and most of what the U.S. has, some 1,400, are tipped with nuclear warheads. The Air Force has asked Congress for more than $50 million to convert over 90 of these missiles to non-nuclear versions, but that could take time.
It would be a fairly involved kind of a thing, because there's a lot different about a weapon with a nuclear warhead in it than one with a conventional warhead in it. There's a lot of differences between those weapons, and so it's not necessarily a simple task, but it's a task which can be accomplished.
Analysts say a new generation of long-range weapons is in the pipeline.
Its accuracy and its ability to reduce casualties makes the cruise missile a popular weapon, but the dwindling number available to military planners suggests it's a victim of its own success. Jonathan Aiken for CNN, Washington.